Creating views. As we dig into our section on database objects, the first one we're going to look at is the view, a wonderful tool that will be one of your go-to objects for providing data access to the underlying tables for your users. So in this nugget, we're going to take a look at what a view is. We'll look at the benefits. We'll go over the different kinds of views, and then we'll jump into the virtual Nugget Lab and create some views. Let's jump in. So at the surface, think of a view as just simply a SQL statement stored in the database. That's really all it is. But oh, it's so much more than that because of the benefits that it brings to the table. So let's say you're ready to unleash your database into the wild. You want your users and your applications to use it. How are you going to give them access to the data? Are you going to give them direct access to the tables? Believe it or not, that happens quite a bit. And that is a very dangerous thing to do, not only from a security perspective, but just from managing it. Because if users and applications are writing queries directly against these tables, what happens over time? You know, these are not just, databases aren't something you just design and forget about. They evolve over time. Schemas change. You'll be adding new tables into here, right? You may be changing existing columns, adding more columns. And what that means is every query that directly hits these tables is probably going to need to be changed in some way or another. And you'll probably break applications by doing so. So this is what views are just beautiful for. What we do is we give our users and our applications access through views to those underlying tables. Now, if we change anything down there, we can just change the view, right? We just change our views, and it's like nothing ever happened. And it's just that's one of the big, huge benefits of views, not to mention security. Now we only need to manage security at this level, not down at the granular level, which is also a lot safer because the only people that should really have access to those base tables are DBAs and developers. Some other benefits we get from using views. We can simplify those complex queries. Again, if we were to give users direct access to those tables, chances are, if we designed it right, that it's a highly normalized database, which will result in very complex queries with many joins. And your basic users who know the very, very basics of, selecting columns from a table probably won't be comfortable with writing queries against a complex structure. So we can greatly simplify that just by giving them access to a view that contains all the information they need. This also, as I mentioned, simplifies and enhances security. It enhances it because we're protecting our base tables, and it simplifies it because we'll just have a few objects that we can control data access through. Another part of security, by the way, is we may have extremely sensitive columns down here that only a select few number of people should see. So we can omit those from the view, keep those in the base tables, and give those other users that need that sensitive information their own view to access it through. And that also plays into simplifying data access. We can also hide table and data complexity. We may have table with system names in them that make no sense or little sense to very few people, so we can create a view on top of that, alias the column into something that makes more sense. We can also mask data complexity. We may have a lot of codes underneath there, and we can use case statements to turn those codes into actual values that make sense. We can also provide access to subsets of data. So if we have satellite offices all over the place, we can give each office their own view that gives them their slice of data. Another popular use for views is to wrap those summarization and aggregation queries into a view. That usually powers a report. And those queries can get fairly complex. So that's why we want to wrap those into a view to make it easy for users to access that data. We have many different kinds of views out there. We have standard views, and this is what you'll be creating 90% of the time, right? Just a query stored in the database with a name attached to it, because anybody outside of the database that are using views looks just like a table, right? We're going to select star from view just like we would select star from table. So that's going to be the most popular one. We also have system views. These are there to expose database server and state information that we can use to get information about SQL Server in our databases. We also have indexed views. Now, one of the disadvantages of views is they're not very performant, right? So indexed views were created so we can speed up our views. And you'll want to do this on those views that take up a lot of time, especially things like views that aggregate and summarize data. Another name for this, by the way, that you'll see out there is materialized views, because putting an index on a view materializes it on disk. We also have partitioned views, and a partitioned view is really just a view that unions a bunch of tables together. So a very common thing to do when you're dealing with an extremely large volume of data in a table is to break it down into smaller member tables. And usually you'll do this based on a time frame. Right? So if you're dealing with a lot of data, maybe you have a table for every week, maybe a table for every month, maybe every quarter, maybe every year. Again, depends on how much data you're dealing with. And now, querying all of these smaller tables would be difficult without what's known as a partition view. we create a view that's just going to grab everything from all these tables and union them together. And the beauty of partition views is if a user writes a query that only targets subsets of data that are in a couple of those tables, it's only going to hit those tables. And to take this to the next level, there's also something known as a distributed partition view, where we put these member tables on their own SQL servers. And now, again, if a query comes through that view and only hits a couple of those tables, it's only going to hit those servers that contain that data. Great stuff. All right, let's jump over to the Virtual Nugget Lab. We'll take a look at how to create some views and work with them in SQL Server. Welcome back to the Virtual Nugget Lab. Let's jump right into SQL Server Management Studio. We're going to be working with our project here called Creating Views. Just run a little setup here that will get our TestDB in the shape we need it to run these demonstrations. There we go. It's good to go. Give that a refresh as well. And we're good to go. So TestDB now contains our certification database that we created that contains certifications, learners, exams, vendors, and the certifications that learners have acquired. So let's open up views.sql. So let's say we've got a web page that allows learners to see their certifications. So we've got a page and we need a view that powers that page. Well, we could create a simple view here called all learner certifications that will tie together all the information they need. So notice we're joining 3 tables into the mix here, 4 total tables that we're working at, so we can pull out learner information, their date of birth, the certification they acquired, when they acquired it, as well as the vendor of the certification. So this is easily something that we could give to a developer that they could utilize. Again, rather than giving them access to the base tables, they can utilize this view to pull all that information to the page. Creating a view is very simple. We do a create view, followed by the name of the view, followed by an as, and then our query. And that will create a view. Remember, the name is how we're going to reference it because we're going to treat these views just like we treat tables. So let's go ahead and execute that. That will create the view. Now you can see it underneath views inside of the database. There it is. You can even expand it. Take a look at columns. There it is. You can even put triggers on views if you wish. And now we can treat this view just like a table. Select star from view. If we hit execute, there it is. We could join this to other tables, to other views. We can create complex queries with filters. We can do everything that we can do with a table. It's just that it's a view rather than a table. Another way to create a view is to right-click on View over here and choose New View. That's actually going to open up the Query Designer. And so now we could add all of our tables inside of here, specify what columns we want. Maybe we want to figure out, maybe we want to create a view here called Certification Exams. That will allow us to see the certification name as well as the exams associated with them. So we wouldn't need learner in this case, so we could remove it. We wouldn't need learner certifications, we could remove it. Maybe we want vendor in here, so we would actually need vendor. Boop, there we go. Now we've got vendor in here. We can get the name. So certification name, vendor name, and the exam name, maybe the cost as well. And now we have ourselves a view. And we can even test it in here. Boop, there it is. There's the results. Boop, we just need to alias a couple of these columns in here because we have name listed multiple times. We have the name of the exam as well as the name of the certification. And that's easy to do. You could do that here in the designer, right when you define. Every time you click on it, it's just going to put it down here inside of this list. So this would be the certification name. So let's call this certification name. We could go down and call this exam name. We could re-execute it, and now we've got the results. So a very simple way to create a view. And so if you're not comfortable with SQL yet, again, this is a great way to get comfortable with it because you can graphically design it. Then you can save the view. Let's go ahead and save this. We'll give this the name. How about certification exams? Hit OK. Just refresh this over here. And boom, we've got it. Now we can script out the definition of this, right? Script view as create to. Let's create this to a new query window. Connect to SQL Nugget. And boom, there's our view right there. How cool is that? So yeah, a couple of ways to create views. You can do it the simple way in the designer, or you can just write out raw SQL if you're comfortable with doing so. Let's look at one that's a little more complex. Let's say that our users have come to us and they said, hey, we need to build a report that's going to gather all kinds of certification stats. And we're like, hey, no problem. We can do that. What do you need? And they say, well, we need the certification name. We need the vendor associated with the certification, the total number of exams that certification has, the total number of learners already certified in that certification, and the most recently acquired date of that certification. We're like, hey, no problem. We can do that. So we build this complex query that's all wrapped inside of a view that'll make it easy for them to grab all this information from the view. So very simple to do that from a report rather than writing this big honking query and attaching that to the report, right? So here's what we did. We grabbed that base information, the name and the vendor from the certification of the vendor table, and then we have a couple of derived tables, right? Subqueries in the from clause. One that's going to pull out the total number of certified for that certification, as well as the max date, which will give us the most recently acquired certification. All of that's going to join a couple of tables together to get that information. And then we've got another derived table, another subquery in the from clause down here, that is going to hit the exam table to give us the total number of exams associated with that certification. So if we highlight this whole thing and hit execute, we just created a view, and now it'll be very easy for them to hit this view just by pulling all the information out of it from the report. And see, there's a lot of different ways that we can use this as well. So there's all of our certifications, total exams, total certified, and the most recently acquired date of that certification. And we should be able to see that view if we just refresh our views over here. There it is. You can even see from the UI here, from Object Explorer, that it's treated just like a table. Look at this. We could select the top 1,000 rows, edit the top 200 rows if we wanted to run updates into this view. You can also go into the properties here, go into permissions, and start granting users permissions onto the view. And we've got a whole nugget dedicated to security, so you'll see all kinds of things that we can do from a security standpoint. But it's pretty much what you would expect, right? We can give users select or DML permissions, select and update, or we could give DBAs and developers DDL permissions, so they could alter and drop and do all that stuff from a structural perspective. And finally here, you can also see your system views. There's lots of system views within here. In fact, there's a system view to see all views. So if we select the top 1,000 rows and head to the bottom, here are the 3 views that we just created. The South SQL Server internally keeps track of everything. In this DBT Nugget, we saw how to create views. We defined what a view is, just simply a stored query, took a look at the benefits, the different kinds of views, and saw how to create and use them. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.